Hello, I'm Ben David, District Attorney for New Hanover and Pender County.
And I'm Jay Corpening. I'm the Chief District Court Judge for New Hanover and Pender County, and we're on point.
And we're joined today here in this beautiful city of San Diego, California, by Dr. Vincent Felitti, a man who is truly a living legend. Dr. Felitti actually came to this city in 1968 to be one of the first people to work in the Kaiser Permanente area hospitals. And over these last 55 years has done some remarkable research and work that focuses on what I call the center of the starfish, health, and specifically adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments, what we call ACEs. Dr. Felitti, it's truly an honor to be here with you today. And I know I speak for both me and Jay Corpening in saying that you have not only changed how medicine looks at child trauma, but in fact, legal professionals as well.
I agree. It's changed everything about how I do court. There is nothing that I do in my courtroom now that in any way resembles how I held court 10 years ago, and it's all because of what I've learned about adverse childhood experiences and trauma.
And we really want to start with you, if we could. Could you just introduce yourself to the men and women and children who are watching right now?
Well, I'm a physician. I have spent my 50 years of my career as an internist at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And while there, I was asked to create a department of preventive medicine. And I took the opportunity, figuring I could get into play some ideas that generally had been resisted. The department consisted of two halves, one called Health Appraisal, where we provided to about 2,500 people a year, adults, an unusually comprehensive medical evaluation. It was a 2-visit process, starting with a very lengthy medical history questionnaire filled out at home. Then visit 1 was collecting all sorts of medical data, laboratory studies, x-rays, etc., EKGs, audiometry. And visit 2 then was reviewing the history and the laboratory results and carrying out a very detailed medical evaluation. For instance, every diabetic had retinal photographs taken. Every single person had pulmonary function measurements taken, etc. So that was where all of this began.
I want to get back to how this all developed. So here you are dealing with people who have 600-700 pound, severe obesity that are able to lose weight dramatically, 200-300 pounds in 1 year. What happened, did you notice, after they immediately lost all of that weight after that year? What would happen?
Well, two things happened to focus our attention on this. One, many people dropped out of the program after achieving dramatic partial success. Let's say they needed to lose 300 pounds and they lose 150 and drop out of the program, quickly regain all of the weight, etc. And pursuing that led us to probably the most important starting question in understanding obesity. How old were you when you first began putting on weight? It's an easy question to ask. It's an easy question to answer. The second question is, why do you think it was then? Why not 5 years earlier, 8 years later? Why then?
What did these patients tell you was the reason that they gained all this weight, and how old were they when they first really started putting on these dramatic weight gains?
Well, that varied, but basically it was in childhood or early adult life. I remember one patient very clearly. I asked her these questions: how old were you when you first began putting on weight? 24. Why do you think it was then, not 5 years earlier, 8 years later? And then she answered, well, when I was 23, I was raped, and I gained 115 pounds in the year after. And then she looks down at the carpet and says, overweight is overlooked, and that's the way I need to be.
Boy.
And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. No wonder it's so hard to get people to lose weight, because very frequently It's not their problem. It's their unconscious solution to distant, unspeakable problems from their childhood.
And so, what I know that you found from that, talking first to that initial woman who gained all that weight as sort of a protective factor, right? Armor, to not have the unwanted attention of men. She was one of many patients you interviewed, and what you found in that first just small sample of 300 patients there at that obesity clinic was that 55% of your patients had been child sexual survivors. And what that abuse underlies is that there is a social determinant of health, that those who have suffered that incredible trauma, that incest, are going to magnify that later in life by being extremely obese in 55% of the cases. That must have been just a mind-blowing thing for you to have discovered.
Believe me, it was. I mean, I must be doing something wrong. This can't be, something this outrageous. People would know. Somebody would have told me in medical school.
And you went to Johns Hopkins, and I want to thank you for that. That saved my grandfather's life. And they don't teach that in medical school.
No.
Well, now here's where it gets really interesting, because I know that you presented your findings at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. There were many colleagues of yours in the audience who initially dismissed this as being too small of a sample. An epidemiologist by the name of Dr. Robert Anda was listening, and you both agreed that there needed to be a bigger sample size. And because Kaiser Permanente has a little bit of reach here in San Diego, you have 3.5 million people today in this county, you were able to embed a patient history of a different kind.
Oh, yeah.
To ask not just about child sexual abuse and physical abuse and emotional abuse, but things like, are your parents divorced, or is one of them incarcerated? Is there mental illness going on under the roof of your home? How about food insecurity or drug use? There were these 10 questions, what you later referred to as the ACE questions: adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments.
And they were selected because they were the most common 10 in our program, not the only 10 in the world, but in our program, which was clearly a middle-class sample.
And so what did you find after administering this sample to thousands of patients in a confidential doctor-patient setting? What did you find in terms of the prevalence of high ACE scores? Because as I understand it, the higher the ACE score, and you get a point for every time you answer one of those questions, yes, and you get a 0 if you're very lucky, but you could get a 10 if you're dealing with real trauma. What did you find when you administered this patient survey over thousands of patients in the Kaiser Permanente system?
Well, much to my surprise, literally every day, I would be stopped 2-3 times a day by patients in the hallway going home, going through the health appraisal division of the department, who wanted to thank me for asking those questions on the questionnaire. About half of them would go on to tell me how pleased they were, how grateful to the examiner, who, hearing the dark secrets of their life, was still nice to me. And they want to see me again. And I thought, my God, this is really exposing incredible shame that is keeping all of this suppressed. Well, the first thing that keeps it all suppressed is that we're all taught as children, subtly, but very effectively, that nice people don't talk about certain things.
Right.
I mean, who as a little kid ever remembers asking their mother if she and dad, do this sexual intercourse thing?
Right.
It doesn't happen. We have all been taught early that, nice people don't talk about certain things, that surely don't ask questions about them.
And they weren't teaching it in medical school. And what is unbelievable is here we are in the mid-'80s, and now you have all this data which says beyond a reasonable doubt, if I was in a courtroom, we know this through the next 40 years of studying tens of thousands of patients and watching what happened to them medically, that there really are social determinants of your health that tie back to this childhood trauma, that there's a difference between one bad hour, like when a kid skins their knee or gets stitches even, versus a bad childhood when they're enduring all this toxic stress and all these hormones are being released into their body, and your brain is literally changing its shape in those first magic 5 years when 90% of that brain is forming. And what you found in the next 40 years of really looking at these patients is that whether it was diabetes or ischemic heart disease, or it was, obviously obesity and
Lung cancer.
that someone with an ACE score of 6 or higher has a 20-year less life expectancy than someone with a 0 or a 1. And that there are all sorts of things, whether it's a higher prevalence of smoking or drug use and obviously alcohol abuse, suicidal ideation, all of these things increase as that score increases. That must have been a remarkable thing to have learned and understood and then have to go tell your colleagues about. How was it received when you struck upon this and you and Robert Anda had developed all of this study to conclusively establish what we now know to be beyond any dispute?
Well, the findings of our comprehensive medical evaluation, health appraisal, were all put into the patient's chart, of course. So their physicians were, faced with information being in the chart, and they were not pleased with this. If I wanted to be a damn shrink, I'd have been a shrink. I'm a whatever. Vince, that was 50 years ago. What the hell do you expect me to do with that information now? Well, that's easy. We would say to a patient, I see on the questionnaire that. Can you tell me how that's affected you later in your life? And then we would listen.
What would they say when you listened?
Oh, well, Mom abandoned the family when I was 7. Okay? My brother raped me when I was 14, etc., things like that. And it was really quite extraordinary. I mean, because things that we would naturally assume, yeah, they occur, but I mean, they're rare as hell. They were very common, but no one ever seeks the information. I remember in medical school, a classmate of mine who's a psychoanalyst in Boston now stops me in the hall and he says, have you heard? They have an incest case in Phipps. Phipps was the psychiatric division at Johns Hopkins. And, I look back at that now and I think, my God, yes, that was the way we thought at the time,
Right. Well, and, just as you were talking about how, the people who are overeating to be invisible or put on armor, we're obviously looking at food as the solution rather than the problem. We see the same thing in a courtroom. People medicate that trauma by turning frequently to opioids, and we're losing 350 people a day in America right now to that, 10 a day in North Carolina, 2 a week in our district. People are obviously choosing bad relationships because that's what love looked like to them, or they become that abuser and visit it on others intergenerationally, or they join gangs when they're in these, inter-family or inter-city dynamics that say, I need protection out there and I don't trust the police, so I'm going to find that without structure at home in other teenagers. And so what we see time and again in the court system is not only that the social determinants of health have medical complications and implications in someone's life, but that they're the same thing as the root causes of crime. And so just as we talked about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, if we can predict something, we can prevent it. And if we know that these young children are in crisis, particularly living with this toxic stress, if we get to them early enough, we can do something, because what your findings have conclusively shown, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-host now about some of the solutions, is that a high ACE score is not a death sentence. That in fact, particularly if you catch it early on, like so many other diagnoses, you can actually treat something and change the arc of a child's life, and adversity can even build character.
The key idea here is that what you have to do is discover the underlying cause. Why does this person weigh 483 pounds? Why does this person, why has he become an alcoholic? That kind of thing. That discovering the underlying cause is crucial. And it's quite acceptable to patients, as they used to convince me 2 and 3 times a day in the hallway, with their stopping to tell me how pleased they were, grateful that those questions were in the questionnaire, and then go on to tell me the examiner, hearing the dark secrets of their life, was still nice to me, and he wants to see me again. And I thought, my God, I mean, the amount of shame that is hidden in these people. And
there's a lot of blaming of victims, and particularly people blame themselves. And I think the transformation that we're undergoing in the court system is when you look at a child, particularly one who's acting out in school or is now standing before you charged with a crime, you don't just say what's wrong with you, but you ask what happened to you. And when you really peel back the underlying causes, as you say, and not just hack at the symptoms of that behavior, you can actually get to what needs to be done to try and get them out of the system as both a defendant and a victim.
And what we discovered there was that it's more effective to collect the information by an inert mechanism, a paper questionnaire, that we would then say at the office, I see on the questionnaire that. Can you tell me how that's affected you later in your life than it is to get it face to face? Because the asking physician is overwhelmingly likely to initially be uncomfortable asking this kind of question. That'll be evident to the patient in tone of voice, facial expression, and so forth. But if you simply deal with the question that after it's been answered on an inert mechanism, the paper-based questionnaire, that's easy to say. It's obviously easy to answer because of the responses that we got from that.
Well, and we're taking the same type of evaluations of people on the intake process right now. And what we're seeing is 62% of the IV drug users in our hometown have an ACE score of 5 or higher. You know, someone with a 6 or higher, 75% more likely to be justice involved as both a defendant or as a victim one day than someone with a 1 or a 2. The statistics go on and on. You can go into a prison cell and see who it is, and it almost always tracks back to these adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments. And if we can predict it, like we said, we can prevent it. And this is where it gets really exciting because our Chief District Court Judge and I have been very privileged to work with a whole host of people, diverse in every respect, judges and prosecutors, public defenders, clerks, sheriffs and police, but also Democrats and Republicans, metro and rural, black and white, truly all coming together to say, in the interest of our children and in the interest of stopping that revolving door at the courthouse, we can embrace the same science, not just to solve cases and prove them beyond a reasonable doubt like we've been doing for years with DNA and fingerprints and ballistics, but we can use the science you've developed to actually prevent future crime if we love on our children today. And so, Jay, that's where I'd love to turn it over to you and talk a little bit more about the efforts of the ACEs Task Force in North Carolina and what we're doing in the courtrooms in our hometown.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. And Vincent, we know from your study and from follow-on studies that these adverse childhood experiences, this childhood trauma, changes the brain and the body. Your study showed us so clearly that lifetime health outcomes were affected significantly. We also know that it can affect behavior and mental health, not just physical health. And so one of the important things for us as we learned more about your work as we started to implement it was that those adverse childhood experiences can help explain the behavior we're seeing. Not excuse it, but explain it so that we better understand how to respond to it. So as a court system, we're trying to respond to that underlying cause of behavior, just like in medicine, you're trying to find what's the root cause of this illness. How significant is it, do you think, that a court system is willing to take a deep dive into root cause of behavior as opposed to just responding to that moment in time?
Yeah, I think it's enormously significant. Let me give you an example that might be useful someday. The street drug crystal meth, okay? The street drug crystal meth is the street name for the pharmaceutical methamphetamine. Methamphetamine was the first prescription antidepressant introduced for sale in the United States in 1942. Does that mean anything? Yeah. In other words, one thing it means is that people are trying to help themselves. Oh yeah, hey, this stuff helps that I'm buying on the street. But it's dangerous. People die from it. Yes, I mean, you take 30 aspirins, you're going to die. So it was really, really quite remarkable. And the same thing with obesity. Initially, people eat to feel better. Our expression, sit down, have something to eat, you'll feel better. Well, we all do that to some degree. And then people discover that as they're putting on weight, that has secret benefits. you'll be less attraction gathering to men. And well, I remember we had in the early days of the program, we had two men who were guards at the state penitentiary downtown. One lost 100, one lost 150 pounds. They were both very clear that they were no longer comfortable going into the prisoner cell blocks normal size. They felt a hell of a lot better going in looking big as a refrigerator coming through the door.
Throw your weight around.
Wow, literally.
Yeah.
Right. Are there other court systems, other statewide court systems in America today that you're aware of that have so fully embraced your work besides North Carolina?
None that I'm aware of, and certainly none that have made contact with me. When we published our first article in May, I think it was 1999, it was turned down by all of the big prestigious medical journals. Journal of the American Medical Association, New England Journal of Medicine, British Journal of Medicine, all turned it down. It was accepted by the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, a good journal, but not a prestigious one that everybody has heard of. And that set off a bunch of interviews, requests for me to come and speak all throughout Canada and the United States. Not one of them was a medical setting.
So tell us, you shared that with Ben and I last week.
Yeah.
Tell us what the two common requests came from.
The most common was school boards. County school board here, provincial school board in Canada. And then after that, the next most common one was police departments. And then after that, judicial settings.
How about that?
And I mean, even a presentation to the United States Congress. I was asked to do a presentation in 2008 to the Vermont State Legislature. One of the legislators was a gynecologist, and he had heard of the ACE study findings. And as a result of that, the key thing from their standpoint was the huge dollar savings that having this information produced. For instance, in Kaiser, in the very early days, a mathematician at the University of California in San Diego came by and offered at no charge to carry out a 135,000 patient study. That's 2.5 years throughput for health appraisal. We were seeing about 50,000 adults a year. And to see whether my integrating the ACE questions, which upset the hell out of my colleagues, whether my integrating the ACE questions had any discernible benefit. And incredibly, he found in this enormous sample that it led to a 35% reduction in doctor office visits in their subsequent year, and an 11% reduction in emergency room visits their subsequent year. Well, at that time, the outpatient budget, the doctor office visit budget, not hospital, the outpatient budget in California for Kaiser Permanente in Southern California was $6.4 billion. So if you knock off the utilization of 35% of that, I mean, in an insurance company, you pay for everything on day one. Well, you just surplused a couple of $1 billion. So it was, remarkably effective economically. And that spread from the Vermont State Legislature to where last September, 39 state legislatures in the United States had passed legislation designed to support integrating the ACE findings into medical practice. And I was very pleased in Vermont and in the early days, but how's the legislature going to do that? Well, the clearest effect in terms of description and so forth was California. which was fairly late in the list, but nevertheless. The program in California is called ACEs Aware, and if anyone is interested, they can look up that term on the internet and learn about the program. But basically, any physician seeing a Medi-Cal patient, basically a poverty patient where the state pays, seeing a Medi-Cal patient in California who collects an ACE history has $28 added to whatever the fee would have been for that visit. It just happens automatically. And it certainly has promoted this. The last time I checked, about a year or so ago, there were now 1.2 million Californians who had a complete ACE history taken as a result of that ACE program, the ACEs Aware program. So, and then diagnostically, it was tremendously important to physicians, because many of our intractable problems are intractable because we don't really understand or deal with the underlying causality. We end up treating the manifest symptoms. That would be like treating tuberculosis with aspirin for the fever and cough medicine for the cough. Okay, gives you some relief of the symptoms, but no improvement in terms of the problem per se. So this has really been a very meaningful experience diagnostically and hence therapeutically, if you understand underlying cause, and also economically.
So for us, understanding underlying cause doesn't necessarily save money in healthcare, but it can. But it can save money and it can save lives in actually being able to change behavior for the better at an early age, for example, with our justice-involved kids or our child welfare-involved families.
So something to keep in mind there is we screened a prison in California for ACE scores. And I don't remember how many cases there were. It was many hundreds, 600, 800, something in that realm. But it was greatly appreciated by the prisoners. And that harkens back to being able to tell somebody important, doctor, this is a good analogy to confession in the Catholic Church, a priest, etc., the dark secrets of your life, and find that you're still accepted to them. Because, there was no humbug about, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. No, we just listened.
Well, and another reason that those prisoners might appreciate what we're working on right now is that we know that 2 out of 3 people who get out of prison, and 98% that we're putting in are getting out one day, that 2 out of 3 of them are back in that jail cell within 3 years under the current rates of recidivism. Yeah. That's the revolving door we talked about. Yeah. And it's because we're not doing more for formerly incarcerated to reduce barriers to entry, certainly, but it also is because we haven't treated the underlying symptoms. Right. And so if we're trying to keep everybody safer, we should really be focusing on this captive audience, so to speak, that, what is your ACE score and what can we do to help, even during your incarceration, deal with some of this underlying childhood trauma, because their ACE scores are through the roof, statistically speaking.
So here's an example to keep in mind. What if you were in a prison to bring together 100 inmates into an auditorium and tell them that you would like them to help you understand more about how childhood experiences can affect adult health and well-being? Would you please take one of the questionnaires in the back of the room and fill it out, but do not put your name on it, okay? Then put it in a box next to the ones where you pick it up. And then bring them together maybe a week or 10 days later and project on the room what the overall, you had whatever, 100, 200 people, and this many had,
a 1 or a 4 or a 7 as your score.
Yeah. What do you guys think this means? And the discussions have been quite productive. We did that in our obesity program by bringing together about 12 people in a group that we would meet with for 2 hours every week and ask them questions. We did not teach them things. We asked them questions and helped them discover what they needed to learn. What are the benefits of obesity? And, somebody would start with a small answer, and then the answer would grow, and pretty soon, oh, wow, you're dealing with, really heavy-duty, serious things. So it's a good technique that works well.
And we've learned that we've got to shift the narrative, that it's not what's wrong with you or what did you do, it's what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also have to remember that that's not a question that, Ben, what happened to you, that I ask in a courtroom, because I'm not going to get an answer. So I want to circle back to your questionnaire and the integrated questionnaire for just a minute to put a pin in that. I'm hearing you say it was really significant for your study that the ACEs questions were embedded in a more comprehensive health questionnaire.
Yes. So the 10 ACE questions were distributed over a 10-page biomedical questionnaire, et cetera. And that way you weren't hit with the whole bunch all at once.
Right.
So, we would inquire if you ever had kidney stones or recurrent kidney infections, et cetera. And then in there, have you ever been sexually molested? And have you ever been raped? And questions like that. So you only see one or two of the ACE questions, close together.
Sure. Did you feel like you get more accurate information that way?
Oh, yeah. And you, without question, you get more accurate information by using this inert mechanism to collect the information initially than trying it face to face.
And I want to circle back to a point you made earlier too, where you had patients coming up to you in the hall almost saying, thank you for still liking me after learning. And I want to share with you a journey that I've taken over the last few years with a group that I call my Promise Keepers. These are young women who have typically suffered opioid use disorder, some using heroin right up till delivery of their baby, some even using heroin in the hospital at or around the time of delivery of their baby. Child welfare comes and takes custody of their baby out of the hospital. They're in a dark place in their life. And I understand now, after learning about your study, that there's a lot that led her to that point, right?
Yeah.
And as a judge in a position of power in the room, I could literally say, what the hell are you doing? I could. And 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I might have. Not confessing that I did, but I might have. But today, I go through the first time that I see her, we've just taken her baby. First time I see her, I go through the legal stuff that I've got to do. And then I circle back to her and said, are you okay today? Are you getting the help that you need to deal with your opioid use? What else can I do to help you connect to services? And will you promise me to stay alive until next week because you're important to me and I really want to see you next week?
Well, one thing you could do would be to ask, how old were you when you first started using drugs? Easy to ask, easy to answer. Then the next question is, why do you think it was then? Why not 5 years earlier or 10 years later? Why then?
That's a great point.
Yeah, because it helps them understand things too.
And I think that one of the significant things for me that was like a light bulb going off was that when I was not judgmental about what they're sharing, they're more likely to keep their promise to stay alive. And that's why I've got a group I call Promise Keepers that have not only stayed alive, even though they're at high risk of overdose and death, they've stayed alive, they've gotten their children back. They've been successful. Now, a piece of that is I pride myself as being a hope dealer. I think that the science of ACEs helps us understand what's brought people to us, and the science of hope can help us enable them to be successful in the future. I'm reading Casey Gwynn's book about that right now. He talks about you.
Former city attorney of San Diego.
Right, he talks about you extensively in his book and your work. But we see success when we don't judge from what we're learning about that background, what we're learning about their childhood trauma. When we're not judgmental, but we are responsive to meet their needs, we can change that behavior.
Well, and that's where I want to jump in, Jay, because this is when it gets really exciting for those of us who keep seeing the same, not only individuals, but same families generationally. We're on the third and fourth generation of some of the same families in our hometown. And the great news is, from your findings, is that kids are resilient. And when we talk about bouncing back, if you're starting from a place that feels like hell, it's not a very hopeful message to say, we're going to get you back to where you were before all this abuse started. You have to get them to a point they didn't even know was possible. And I give your local district attorney, they're called city attorneys out here, a lot of credit for opening my eyes up to something called a HOPE score, which is really about having willpower and way power, a way forward for people who are in crisis. And even if they can't yet see it for themselves, there are these loving adults that can do something to really change the trajectory of their lives. And this is where it gets into the work that Jay and I have been doing for a long time, and this task force is working on now. And that is, I talked at the start of this segment about the center of the starfish. It's a starfish model we've developed where health is the center, mind, body, and spirit of individuals, healthy relationships among and between each other. But the buffering, the way we build resilience and hope in our children, really come from 5 different groups in any community in the world. And they are in no particular order. The government, we really have a role here, whether it's DSS or police or great judges, and both parties and all branches. And then it's the faith-based community. Even though they're separate by the Constitution, a lot of this deals with doing justice and loving mercy, something that most people understand. And then working with the schools, because we can do a whole lot to reduce crime by keeping kids in schools. 2 out of 3 people in prison are high school dropouts, so keeping them in school is everything. And then jobs, having the business community really get into being more trauma-informed and understanding that the street's an equal opportunity employer. And are they going to bring people all the way back who might be formerly incarcerated or who are dealing with all this trauma? And then finally, the nonprofit community and dealing with the frontline folks in a coordinated way that has science and data behind a lot of what we're trying to do to have collective impact. And I want you to talk just for a second, if you will, Doctor, about how you and Robert Anda really turned to that same Center for Disease Control and realized that there are protective factors on a personal level and even on a community level that can really build that resilience and hope in our children. And even for those of us who are a little bit older when we're first dealing with this stuff, how we can really get a lot better if we honestly confront that as individuals and as a whole society.
I think the biggest public health advance that I can think of in our time would be to figure out how to improve parenting across the nation. And that would not be by conventional teaching or government pamphlets or what have you. I believe it would be by creating a serial television program, starting with 2 newborn infants, one in a very supportive household, the other in a very non-supportive household, and follow them through infancy and childhood. I believe that would be very useful because it would enable people, oh yeah, I could do that, etc.
Which twin has the trauma?
Yeah,
Right.
and I remember seeing a Boston pediatrician on television. This was some years ago, talking about the importance of eye contact with a newborn. Well, I had never really thought about that. Yeah, I mean, you got to keep them clean, you got to keep them warm and fed and stuff, but eye contact? My son and his wife had a new child born, and I was going to France to visit them. I tried it with the new baby there. And it was a remarkable experience. I mean, I unfortunately don't know how to describe it satisfactorily in words, but I mean, I will never forget.
We can see it in your smile.
I'm looking, at this baby's eyes, and he's looking at my eyes. And something profoundly important was going on between us. And I feel frustrated that I can't think of the right words to describe that, but it was a very, very unusual feeling. And I think that's what convinced me that if we're going to bring about some change like improved parenting care, it's going to have to be by depiction, not by description or, government pamphlets, etc.
They just give you paper cuts. You have
Right.
to actually put people in the way of
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So one of the exciting things that we're doing as part of our task force is piloting what we're calling safe baby courts, and we talked a little bit about that last week. But more intensive wraparound services when kids 0 to 3 come into child welfare care, come into custody of child welfare. And one of the important pieces of that is going to be child-parent psychotherapy, which actually engages in those very things. It engages in that personal connection, that eye-to-eye connection, that voice connection, reading to that baby on a consistent basis, and modeling that behavior in person with the parent, with the baby. So where parent and baby are involved together, plus then more intensive supports to build protective factors around that mom. Typically mom, we don't have a lot of dads that engage, but to build those supports around mom, to build those protective factors, to help her find hope and find a way forward to help build a healthy family. And that's one of the really exciting pieces. We're going to be piloting that in New Hanover. We've got another in our home community, New Hanover County. We've got one other pilot, then it's in a rural district that's
In the mountains. So it's a mountains to sea effort.
starting right now. A few other counties coming on board next year. We're hoping to be able to go to the General Assembly and say this works for babies in North Carolina, and we need to do it statewide. But it's, to your point, it's a different way of teaching parenting, and it's a different way of helping that young parent understand how important he or she is in the life of that child, and how to help them make that connection that they need to make.
Can you talk to us just for a minute about what this journey's been like for you? I mean, here we've been now 55 years since you first came to this amazing city and stumbled upon what I think is truly the scientific breakthrough for the criminal justice system, certainly in our lifetime. Where do you think we go from here? What can we do to make us healthier and safer at the same time, utilizing this science that you know too well?
It's useful to keep in mind that in all of medicine, there are only 3 sources of diagnostic information: patient history, physical examination, and laboratory studies. If you ask patients, and I have of 10,000 anonymously, that was the nice thing about Kaiser with enormous populations. At the 94% level, patients chose laboratory tests. Oh, I want all the blood tests, doctor. Yeah, right. You don't have enough blood in your body for all of the blood tests we need to figure
I feel that
out
way sometimes.
which are the relevant ones. And if you ask experienced physicians, they'll tell you that about 75% of the time diagnosis initially comes from patient history, okay? And that's just a very, very important idea. So I think one of the biggest advances in the practice of medicine would be that it routinely starts with a comprehensive history on this patient, not face-to-face. That's too time-consuming, too expensive. An inert mechanism questionnaire filled out at home, etc.
We are actually starting a community justice center in our hometown, much like the beautiful one we're in now. And what we're trying to do is to not just measure, the domestic violence and the sexual trauma and increase convictions and decrease dismissals of these important cases, but actually try to find out what their social determinants of health really are, these ACE scores, and then to navigate them to all sorts of things in the continuum of care, these other 5 arms of the starfish, that can hopefully get them out of this. So it's not just a matter of dealing with what's happened, but having a plan moving forward where they can get out of that bad relationship, they can break that addiction, they can maybe change the trajectory of their lives, because that's ultimately what we're after when we're talking about helping victims.
So here's something to keep in mind and to carry out some simple experiment to determine whether it is productive. That with every inmate coming in, with every prisoner coming in, a comprehensive medical history is obtained from them on paper, et cetera, with an explanation. We want to make sure you're well and in the prison and so forth, and maybe we can even help you in the rest of your life. So fill out this questionnaire, please, and put put it in the box. And then you can do one of two things or both. Bring them together as an audience to discuss. Well, you would pool the data and say, 18% of you lost one parent in the first 18 years of your life, et cetera. Or simply provide the information to the prison staff and see how they feel this would best be dealt with. You probably could identify the big problem cases that you're going to have.
Yeah. I want to turn it over to my colleague now to talk about some of the things that our task force, this ACES task force, has developed as try to be legislative fixes, because we want to be the 40th state, but we want to be the first in America to really bring ACEs into the legal system. Judge, would you mind sharing with him some of the ideas that the task force has developed for how we can do this?
Glad to, Ben. So one of the things is to change the way we do crime victim compensation. In North Carolina, I've heard Ben say, and Ben speaks for the dead, Ben prosecutes on behalf of victims. The state pays for funerals, and that's not enough. We get federal aid that we're not taking advantage of, and so we're looking for comprehensive reform on victim compensation so that today's victims do not become tomorrow's defendants. We're looking at statewide expansion of recovery courts. We know that folks who experience IV use have a history of trauma. Your data tells us, right? Our local data has told us that. And so we're looking for statewide expansion of recovery courts so that we have a better and more powerful way to respond to folks who either suffer opioid use disorder or some other substance use disorder. We're asking our General Assembly to expand our family court system statewide in North Carolina, because as we have a more healthy response to families in times of crisis, that we can mitigate the trauma that their children are experiencing as a result of that. One question: were your parents divorced? We can mitigate that. We have a program called School Justice Partnerships in North Carolina that is designed to keep children in school and out of court, to stop referrals to court for minor childhood misconduct, address the behavior when and where it happens by way of discipline as opposed to punishment, still consequence, but keeping them in school instead of sending them to court. We know from research that there's a downward trajectory associated with coming to court. And we continue to advocate for statewide expansion. That project actually started in our home county. Ben and I partnered on that effort. We've grown to over 50 now in North Carolina out of 112 local education authorities. So that's growing. But the notion of actually responding to that behavior, responding to the root cause of behavior, is something that we're going to ask the General Assembly to continue to fund. And those are just a few of the funding initiatives that we're embarking on with our General Assembly to try to carry forward your work.
Well, I would be very grateful if you could, send me some information periodically about what you're doing and how it's turning out, because I would certainly be very interested in it for sure.
We'll be doing that. And
sure, absolutely. And I can tell you that the entire atmosphere of my courtroom is different now. Ben doesn't get to visit me very often, but every once in a while he does. But whether it's in our juvenile justice courtroom or our child welfare courtroom, the entire atmosphere is different and focused on building strengths to counteract the childhood trauma that we know existed, and we've tried to find better ways to find out about it. We love the questionnaire. We were excited about it after we talked last week. The more comprehensive questionnaire that we might be able to implement so that we can get that important information without having to ask those personal questions, particularly in a courtroom setting where, of course, they're not going to disclose.
Well, and Vincent, I want to say, I think there's a good reason I don't see Judge Corpening more in his day job working with kids. Most district attorneys, and many are going to be watching this one day, will say, well, what about personal responsibility? What about rape, murder, armed robbery, and habitual felons and drug traffickers? Do you really care about their ACE score? I mean, what about prison? Emphatically, there is a place for the criminal justice system to punish and to And I unapologetically have been sending killers, rapists, child molesters to prison for 25 years now. I didn't get elected 6 times by going soft on crime. This is about going smart on crime. And what I've learned is that the vast majority of people in the criminal justice system, those are the high-end cases that all of us talk about. But it's not bad people, it's good people with bad problems. And if we actually start treating the problems, we're doing our jobs much more effectively. And that's really what I believe we all have a responsibility to do. It no question saves money. We have actually closed 11 prisons in North Carolina over the last 10 years.
Wow.
And reinvested a lot of that money into mental illness, into drug misuse, into our children. We actually raised the juvenile age. There's a lot of things that we've tried to do to say there's treatment over here, and then there's punishment over here. And we do not confuse that there are still times when we have to absolutely bring out the big stick of the criminal justice system. But to work smarter has been one of the great joys of my life. And I'll tell you, now that I'm getting ready to retire myself from this job, I see people that I've encountered. And I see mothers who are now introducing me to their kids and say, you took a chance on me by putting me in a drug treatment court 10 years ago, and I've been sober for the last 6 years. Or a veteran on our veterans treatment court saying, you know what, I was in a bad way when I came back from Iraq, but you showed a second chance to me, and now I have a job, and I never am going to go back to jail. Those are the stories that I'm just as proud of as any verdict I've obtained in some of the worst cases. And I think that for those of us who are in the criminal justice system, it was a real aha moment when we found that there was this science backing up everything we were seeing, but we didn't really have a name for it. You have given us that language to speak to each other. It's called ACEs. You have given us a pathway forward, and that's called resilience and hope. And to be able to now work across parties, across systems, to really manifest that, and to make sure that justice is not just about punishing the wicked, but uplifting people. That, I think, gives voice to what most people can agree on. And I am profoundly grateful for your contribution to not only the medical field, but to the criminal justice field. And they say you shouldn't meet your heroes because sometimes you get disappointed. I am so honored to have met you and to have this opportunity. It truly is a great thing that you have done in our country and for the world, and we thank you for everything.
So in response to that, it reminds me when I was in 3rd grade, the teacher insulted me in front of the class saying, the trouble with you, Vincent, is you ask too many questions. And even as a 3rd grade kid, I knew that, that's not a right thing for a teacher to tell a kid. Right. But I often think about that because what success I've had has typically been related to asking questions that other people don't want to deal with.
But that's also a real point for us too, because how we treat people in our courtrooms matters. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just as you had feelings about that 3rd grade teacher, folks who are in front of people like me have feelings about my tone of voice or the words that I choose, or how I speak to them, whether I lift them up, whether I respect them, whether I can light a beacon of hope or not. It matters. It matters. And that's one of the reasons I'm so proud of the work that we're doing in our court system, is that not just in the criminal justice side where Ben lives, but in the juvenile justice, child welfare side, the civil world where I live primarily, we're finding a better way to do things because of your work. And so I join with Ben, as it's been one of the thrills of my life to be here today.
Well, folks, that was Dr. Vincent Felitti live from San Diego talking about this amazing 55-year journey he's been on to discover ACEs and to also discover a pathway forward called resilience and hope. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today and for your incredible contributions to humanity.
Thank you, sir.